when you say we pay for it, that's not technically true. The idea that everybody who's paying into Medicaid paid for it and now they get out what they paid in is obviously not true. It is a redistributive program, and to pretend otherwise is just silly. The people who are paying the payroll taxes are not the people who are taking out through Medicaid, obviously.
Can I just address that super quick? So if we're talking about Medicare, right? Not Medicaid.
Right.
So in Medicare, so you're both correct and incorrect. So it's not like I put in $20 and I get $20 back. That part is true.
Right.
But we all pay into Medicare together, and then we all get it when we are sick.
In this clip, Cenk Uygur goes head-to-head with Ben Shapiro on taxes and healthcare. And honestly, whatever you think about Cenk Uygur, here he completely dismantles Ben Shapiro's talking points. Let's watch it.
So can I ask you a question? I have two questions, really serious questions. One, what is your ideal tax rate? Because it's going to cost a lot of money for a lot of this stuff. And two, what is your ideal level of medical care? Because the fact is that we can spend millions of dollars on people at end-of-life care. We can spend millions of dollars on surgeries and preventative care. I mean, healthcare is an expensive business, even under a single-payer system, which is why generally you end up with rationing. So what is your ideal level of healthcare that is provided to everyone, and what sort of tax rate are you proposing to subsidize that?
Yeah, so those are very, very fair questions. So let's talk about taxes for a second. So conservatives agree or say all the time that the golden era of America was the 1950s and 1960s. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. Our economy was booming at the time, and we became the #1 economy in the world at that time. The tax rate for the highest bracket fluctuated between 70 and 91%. So that is when we were at our best. Now, I want to be clear. I'm also a businessman, and boy, that seems high. It does, okay? And one of the reasons my family were Republicans when I was growing up was because before Reagan came in, the highest marginal tax rate was 70%. So now we are nowhere near that. We have reduced taxes to bare bones, and we have shifted the taxes onto the middle class and away from the rich and corporations. So there is a much better balance to be had. And if you said to me, well, you're going to have $800 in taxes that are new, I say, wow, that hurts. But you're going to save $1,000 in premiums, deal. That is a deal I will take every time because I can do math.
Okay.
So that is the beginning of your answer to taxes. And then you said how much care. Well, so that is something that all the countries that do single payer or a version of single payer struggle with, and they have learned a lot of lessons. And if we stop saying America's #1, we might actually just, first of all, on this issue, we're number 37. And if we looked at what Japan is doing so well, keeping costs down to half of ours and less, we might actually learn something from Japan, Switzerland, and other countries. And by the way, when we say Medicare for all, Medicare Advantage exists. So you can actually add private insurance on top of that, and I find that perfectly great. I have no problems with that at all. So that is the government making sure you don't die and actually lowering rates for you. And then if you want more insurance, no problem.
Ben Shapiro keeps saying universal health care means higher taxes, rationing, and a system like Russia. Cenk Uygur shows how that's not true. Taxes might go up a bit, but you'd save even more by getting rid of premiums, co-pays, and deductibles. Right now, Americans pay more for healthcare than anyone else in the world, but we're ranked 37th in results. Cenk Uygur makes it clear the system is broken, and Shapiro's scare talk doesn't add up.
So all this sounds great, except for the fact that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security eat up 66% of the federal budget every single year. The idea that all of these socialized medicine countries have it so much better than we do, particularly in terms of cancer care, is a joke. We are still #1 in terms of 5-year cancer survival rate here in the United States. And when you talk about top marginal tax rates in the 1950s, there are a couple things that are worth noting. One, that was top individual marginal tax rates, not necessarily the business tax rate. We now have some of the highest corporate tax rates altogether in the industrialized world. And if you would prefer for us to destroy half of the world before we become the only country that didn't have its industrial capacity destroyed, which is what happened in the 1940s, leading to us being the only productive country on planet Earth, essentially, for the next 2 decades, I'm not with you there. I'm not really in favor of having a giant world war that destroys all industrial capacity across the West, so we're the only people who actually have the capacity to produce anything and just markets that we can provide to.
Right. So, first of all, it is fair to say that, of course, the 1950s and 60s were different. We'd just come out of the war. So, but you have to consider all the different factors. So one was that factor, and the other factor that was the one I mentioned. So when Republicans or conservatives say, well, high taxes by definition will lead to slower growth, well, we know because of our experience in the 1950s and 60s that isn't true. Now, you can say there are other factors, but you can't say that the highest marginal tax rate being 70 or even 90% slows down growth, because it didn't. And it wasn't in Japan and Switzerland, it was right here. And by the way, as a guy who grew up Republican, I was surprised by that too. I was surprised that Finland's system of non-competition in schools worked, but it does. So we have to be open to facts and understand. So, and on the issue of where we're good and not good in healthcare, sure, there are different areas where we excel. But Ben, honestly, you're cherry picking there one particular area that we're good. Overall, we're number 37. That is not a good result.
Well, you have
so
to break
if we're
down
not
what that
dying
means.
from cancer, we're dying from other things. It's empirical. We are not as healthy. And finally, this idea that corporations are paying the highest tax rate is both, again, true and untrue. The part that it's true is, hey, there's a rate of 35%. The part that's not true is they don't actually pay that. There is giant loopholes. And they've got $2 trillion sitting offshore, and they won't bring it in. And the reality is that if you look at the taxes from the 1950s, corporations used to pay about a third of our taxes, about 33% of the taxes overall. So they did their fair share, and that is fair. I don't want them paying all of it, but I want them paying a reasonable amount. Now, the share that corporations pay of taxes is down to 10%. You see what they did there? They did wealth redistribution. They took your wealth and redistributed it to them.
Ben Shapiro says Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security take up most of the federal budget. Like, that's a bad thing. Cenk Uygur points out that's what the budget is supposed to do, take care of people. If we're talking about waste, look at the military, $1 trillion budget that's failed audit after audit. These programs are paid into, people depend on them, and most Americans want to keep them. Cenk Uygur adds that cutting care doesn't fix costs, it just shifts the pain to families. Ben Shapiro ignores that basic trade-off, and the argument falls apart.
Okay.
Ben, I'll let you respond to that.
Yeah, one more quick point, and then I'll be done with this, because we can do healthcare for 8 hours here. But two things. One, I'd like to know which tax deduction, when people say tax loopholes, a tax loophole is just a tax deduction that's available to everyone, and some people take advantage of it and some people don't. I can't take advantage of certain corporate tax deductions because my business isn't in those businesses, for example. I'm sort of with you in the sense that I'm not in favor of tax deductions. I'm in favor of a lower tax rate and get rid of a lot of the tax deductions, because I think that it's ridiculous that we have people gaming the system. That said, I'd like to know which tax deductions you'd like to do away with, and I'd like to know also, when you say that corporations pay 10% of the taxes, right, and individuals pay the other 90%, okay, so that means the taxes are still getting paid to a higher rate than we ever have in our history in terms of the tax revenue to the government. The amount of tax revenue to the government right now is trillions of dollars every year. And final point here, you elided this question by saying we can learn stuff from Japan. The standard of care is the entire question when it comes to single-payer health care. That is the entire thing. If people felt like they were going to get the same access to care in a single-payer healthcare system as they did in a system where they can pay their own way, then we would have no controversy here. But the fact is that rationing is mandated as soon as you start having the government run the healthcare system and decide what level of care people get. So I don't want anyone deciding what level of care that I can get. I don't want anyone else to. They don't care about me. They don't know my child's name. They don't know my name. All they know is how much I cost. I mean, Ezekiel Emanuel's at least honest about this. Ezekiel Emanuel comes out and says, listen, I want to die at 70, right? I want to die at 80. That's fine with me. I'd rather die at that. Well, that's good for him. But if I don't want to die at 80, or I don't want my father to die at 80, it's none of his damn business.
So when you say tax revenue is at its highest point, now you know that that's misleading, because everything economically is at its highest point, meaning that we have a lot more people in the country than we did in the 1950s and 60s, so hence we are collecting more overall taxes. But the reality is, as a percentage, it is clearly down. The top bracket now is around 39%. It used to be at 91%. That's inarguable, right?
But our economy is significantly larger than it was then, and part of that is because of reductions in taxes over previous decades.
Well, we tried supply side economics. Hey, Kansas, how's that working out for you? So there's this myth that
it's working out for you. Your business is doing great.
Okay, yeah. Well, we just had 8 years of Obama. So the tax rate is clearly lower for the richest people in the country. It is clearly lower for corporations, in effect. It is, and so to say that it's a record collection is misleading. So in terms of the healthcare and how that relates to the government, oh, by the way, on one more thing on taxes, you said, name me a tax loophole. Mm-hmm. So yes, there are plenty of those. For example, they hide their money offshore. They do tricks like the double Dutch and the Irish sandwich or the reverse. And I would end that. I would say, hey, you know what? If we've got a 35% rate, here's the new rule. You're going to pay 35%, okay? And you're not allowed to hide your money. I don't care if it's in the Cayman Islands. We're going to make that illegal, Mitt Romney. We're going to make it illegal, okay? And so then every once in a while they do a tax holiday. Well, that must be nice. You remember when you got a tax holiday? I don't remember getting a tax holiday. No, that's only for corporations who bribe politicians. So they brought that rate down from 35% to 5%. And they said they were going to create more jobs. Color me surprised when it turns out they didn't. They offshore taxes. They took that 30% extra, put it in their pocket, gave it to their executives, and created no new jobs.
Ben Shapiro talks about taxes like high rates are always bad for the economy. Cenk Uygur reminds him that during America's so-called golden age, taxes on the richest were much higher and the middle class was strong. The problem isn't that we don't have enough money, it's that too much is stuck at the very top. Even small changes could give working people the boost they need. That's the real path to rebuilding the middle class. And that's my take. If you found this breakdown helpful, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.